And we are live, everybody. Welcome to this week's Café Hangout.
I am John Pollock, joined remotely by Wei Ting, and my very first question, Wei, that should have been asked 90 seconds ago, should I be recording anything on this end?
I think you're fine. I think you're okay. Um,
Are you
this
sure?
whole thing, this whole operation is hanging on by a thread. This is the first time John and I have ever tried doing a remote cafe hangout through the magic of the internet. So if it all falls apart, I think people will understand. But I think we're okay. Everything is completely different this time around.
This is the safest edition of the Cafe Hangout that we have ever presented, and this is a first, Wei. I think the first time I ever did a podcast with Wei Ting was in 2008. And there's two ways we have done it, either in person or on Skype, but never on Skype where I'm looking at you, Wei. And I really am just, here you are staring at me on my screen. This is a first.
Yeah, it's a first, but certainly not the last, and I think it'll work. I'm confident it'll be okay.
I have all my trust in you. I am merely the just talking head here. You are the brains
Oh,
behind this entire operation, and a flawless presentation last week. So if something goes wrong this week, it's all on me, not you.
oh, please! I think people are very happy to have you back, and you know what? I'm very excited. I mean, I'm not concerned at all about this. I'm sure this will hold up. It's when we try to get the phone calls in that I'm just I'm gonna be tensing up really bad. So, let's try it out. We're gonna open up all the phone lines, but however, the caveat that I don't think we can take actual phone calls through our usual phone line. What we can do is take calls through Skype. So if you open up your Skype app or Skype on desktop or whatever, search for Post Wrestling. You can call us. You can do audio call. I think we could even try video calling. So those of you who are brave enough and also with the capability of talking to us through video, we would love to see your faces. This one might be a first.
Yeah, let's hold off on that before everyone calls in because off the top we are going to be discussing the Benoit documentary from a few nights ago. But my other question, Wei, what shirt are you wearing?
I am wearing an OSW What Bar Christmas shirt, which we received from our friend Jay Hunter about a year and a half ago, and I actually sleep in the shirt. It is incredibly comfortable. So
Did you sleep in that shirt
I
last
did
night?
sleep in the shirt. I'm actually like, I haven't changed clothes in probably like a week. What?
You were made for this.
I was made for it. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, representing OSW.
All right. Well, there you go. So we will look forward to your calls in the second half of the show. We'll also get into some news items that will be discussed. I guess we will discuss the latest in the chapter of John Jones and what is going on with him. But off the top, let's discuss the season two premiere of Dark Side of the Ring, featuring the episode on Chris Benoit. It premiered to a great reception on Tuesday night, the highest rated episode in the history of the series by a wide margin. There was a lot of focus on this. This is arguably the biggest story in wrestling history. From a mainstream media level of coverage, I think that this one would be ahead of Owen Hart even as well. I mean, those are the two big ones. And uh, I've had a chance to talk about it with Jeff Merrick with the interview that's up on the website, but I've not had a chance to speak with you either on any of our shows or even privately about the documentary Way. So I wanted to get at first just some of your overall thoughts on how such a difficult story was handled in this 2 hour format.
I thought it was handled really well. I mean, first of all, I think honestly, the what I'm really happy about is the fact that this documentary allows us to actually discuss it for such a long time. Since everything that had occurred, it just felt like this was a story that people wanted to shy away from, whether because they had heard so much about it at the time that it occurred, or because they just didn't really want to open up any sort of wounds and. Maybe also the discussion that, hey, how much more can we learn about this? I thought the documentary certainly showed that there was far more perspective on the show, on the discussion that we hadn't heard of, primarily from that of David Benoit, who I thought this whole project was almost like I'm incredibly grateful for that, for the fact that he now actually has a voice and that he actually exists in the wrestling world, because I think for a long time like the guy said, it was almost like he didn't exist. And with the wiping away of his father's memory, of course, kind of came the wiping away of his own personal relationship with the wrestling world, and that part was really sad. And so I'm glad this whole thing existed. If anything, just to kind of like fix that issue a little bit.
It has been repeated many times of just how instrumental Chavo Guerrero Jr. was, and you can certainly look at him that he was the key to so many of these other important people being involved in this project. Like you have to imagine the Chris Jerichos of the world, others involved here have probably been asked countless times to do different interviews or things surrounding this story. And it had to be the right setting that they were going to sit down and be as open about this and feel comfortable in this situation to talk about it. So I think Chavo Guerrero, certainly to me, without him, maybe this thing doesn't even get produced.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, he brought on so many of the other people connected to it, and I'm, knowing that he was actually in the room for David's interview, at least, I wonder how many other interviews too. I'm sure that provided a level of comfort and a level of willingness to be open and honest about such a painful topic.
How about as much about Benoit as this documentary is, it's very much his connection to Eddie Guerrero and his death in November of 2005. And I mean, that is the haunting memory to me way of that Eddie Guerrero tribute show that they did. They actually did two of them that week, but it was the testimonial from Chris Benoit that is shown here of a man that is just absolutely broken from the loss of his friend and having to continue to wrestle throughout this period and continuing to go on. But that's really looked upon as like this breaking point for him. And then some subsequent losses in his life as well of other people like Victor Marr, who was Black Cat and had an enormous influence on him. Johnny Grunge, who was somebody in that Georgia scene that he was close with as well. Losing them
shown in the documentary.
He was shown in the documentary. They died in January and February of 2006, respectively. And that gets coupled with Eddie's loss as well. So it's, to me, a real insight when we're hearing from Vicky Guerrero and just her connection to Nancy Benoit after the loss of Eddie and getting to see firsthand how shattered Benoit was in this period.
Certainly. I mean, I think that talking point has always been brought up on, things such as podcasts and whatnot when discussing reasons that may have affected Chris Benoit's mental state leading into that weekend. But I don't think it's ever been like presented in a way like this where you can kind of see a narrative. And of course, like in the end, it's like could be a combination of really any things. But I do feel like the documentary makes a real case that the death of Eddie Guerrero had some significant effect on the last years of Chris Benoit's life and maybe even towards the last weekend. But I didn't expect that, honestly. When I saw that this was a Chris Benoit documentary, I didn't realize that I was going to get so much on Eddie as well. And that to me was like some of the most painful, most difficult, and most emotional portions of the documentary. I certainly teared up a number of times just, God, watching Vicky and watching Chavo, have to relive those moments and to talk about them. They're incredibly painful, but at the same time, it's like I'm happy to kind of, in a way, be able to share that grief, with these people, because I mean everybody who watched Eddie loved him, and just to kind of like feel the full breadth of like at least a portion of what the closest ones to him might have felt, I think was I don't know, a bit of a way that we can perhaps carry a bit of the burden, and it's that part was really difficult, but I think it made for a really complete photo of her, or at least a more complete photo of maybe where Chris Benoit's mental state was heading into that weekend. To me, this became a story as much about like wrestling as it became about mental health. And I think things have come a long way since 2007 or even 2005 when maybe he was exhibiting a lot of these signs, but that really it really calls into question where he was at, how much concussions might have played, of course, but just the the amount of trauma that losing so many loved ones might have played as well.
Yeah, and I think like that's consistent throughout so many of the subjects in the documentary is the struggle they have of trying to come to grips with that horrific weekend of this person that they knew that you know they showed the clip of Chavo Guerrero from that that Benoit episode that they did that night in 2007, which is explored that he would trust Chris with his children
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I think you can hear that in the interview with Jeff Merrick as well. This friend of his and trying to analyze this, and there's no answer that's going to leave you with an understanding of that weekend. It's horrifying how all of this ended with two victims here in Nancy and Daniel, but here they have a friendship, and for those that were so close to this guy, trying to be able to separate the two. It's very difficult when they're in the middle, having to assess this, even with that much time removed from 2007.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can you maybe take yourself back to like that day and because I remember actually, John, you and I, when we heard about the news, it was on, I think like many people, we saw it on WWE.com at the time, and we were working at the Fight Network, and we were working actually that day on like an obit piece for air before, of course, all the
Yeah,
news had come out.
that's right. Like we had found out, like pretty much most would have known, just finding out when WWE put the notice out that afternoon, and had like you just default to something had to have gone just horribly wrong that led to it. I mean, people were just speculating, like, was this, the carbon monoxide theory that people had, or just what could have happened? Because it's not until the news started to come out later that evening that suddenly you realized what had occurred here, that this was being investigated as a murder suicide. And that was, I mean, I think we found out about that like shortly after Raw, when that news started to come our way, because I had not heard anything throughout Raw in that sense. And that's a part that has been discussed about, like, were there people at WWE that had any kind of inkling of this? Was there a state of denial? And what was that small circle of who knew what at that point going ahead? Certainly, you look at that tribute show, and it's, you have to imagine what the decision making is, and not to necessarily compare to what's going on right now, but that show must go on mentality is very embedded in this company. Like the idea of something tragic has occurred, we just have to stop. That hasn't been the playbook that they move forward, and they chose to move forward that night with that show and apologizing for it 24 hours later.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I certainly do. Like, I don't really fault them honestly for doing the show, because so many moving parts, are in motion when you're putting a show like that together. And I don't know. It's really hard to say how much somebody knew, but I can't imagine like the vast majority of the crew knew, and just the undertaking to just completely overhaul a show. I mean, probably hours, if not minutes, before going to air. I don't know how easy or how realistic that might have been. I certainly don't envy them to be in that position, to have to scramble to create a show like that. So I really don't fault them, for that.
I don't cast like this judgment on, like, just not having like a clear sense of that entire picture. But I will say that, we have seen like how the knee jerk reaction was with Owen. Continue the show. Here we go ahead with Raw. And that's a mentality that I don't expect to change for Vince McMahon in his lifetime. But sometimes the question of, well, can we physically go ahead and do this show? The people are here. Sometimes the question is, like, mentally, should we be going through with this? Are we making the right judgment given the circumstances? This is a traumatic event, and let's just defer because we're not in the right state of mind. We're grieving. And that's not something typically associated with, professional wrestling, where it is always that show must go on mentality. I hope that's something that in time passes, and, these people need time to grieve. That was something I came out of this documentary with. It's so often that everything just keeps going. Think of the loss in these people's lives beyond like a Benoit or an Eddie. These people have how many friends they have lost over their lifetime. And it's just you keep going, and it's kind of you just repress these feelings. And it's a tremendous amount of loss for a lot of these performers that have been in this industry for several decades.
Certainly, yeah. I was, I thought as far as a cast of subjects that they interviewed, I think they got everybody I would have really wanted to hear from that they could have possibly gotten, and I suppose it was almost just good timing. The fact that even somebody like the fact that a Chris Jericho was available, the fact that a Jim Ross was available and not under the WWE umbrella. I think he as a representative of the company's mind state at the time and everything. Like,
By default, he kind of had to become the defense of WWE in
yeah,
this, and that's I felt like there could have been more discussion about the wellness policy, and that's certainly Jim Ross. Jim Ross was not head of talent relations at that time. This was the John Laurinaitis period, but it was a job that he had held that title at one point.
mm-hmm.
In terms of the decision on the tribute show, that to me is like that's not Jim Ross's call, and I don't believe Jim Ross would have been aware of anything, nor would he have the jurisdiction to decide to go ahead or not. So and I don't know if this was all one sit down with Jim Ross, but you have to imagine he will be heavily involved in that Owen Hart
Mm.
episode. Like think of just all of these things he has to relive and go through. I couldn't imagine like this had to have been a long sit down. It's spread out over a few days. It's reliving some of the most traumatic moments of his life.
Yeah, I have to imagine. I mean, these shows, when you sign up for them, I mean, you're signing up to really unearth, I think, a lot of really painful memories for anybody involved. But hopefully, at least it seems to be the case for a certain number of people that have been participants of the show. I mean, it feels like it's a form of therapy to be able to get it all out there. Certainly for David Benoit, from what we've heard since then, it sounds like he was incredibly grateful to be able to get this stuff out there. And like I said, the fact that this man now at least exists, because I remember like years ago, photos of him came out backstage, and I think the immediate reaction from many people watching was just, or seeing the photos, was that, oh my God, look how much he looks like Chris Benoit. This is so strange. This is so weird, and it's that kind of like, I don't know, feeling of like discomfort that I think people didn't really enjoy. And the idea of him like, I believe there were rumors at the time as well that he was trying to train to become a wrestler, and I don't know if that was necessarily met with that much enthusiasm from the audience either. And ultimately, that's all to say that those reactions, while I can understand, are incredibly unfair, and the ability that he was able to at least get his side of the story out there and to get his voice out there, and the realization that he was like somebody who was one of the biggest victims in this whole thing. I thought that was really great.
Yeah, I think that you come out of this with a profound sense of empathy towards David and what he has had to live with for the past 13 years. It's unimaginable what he has had to go through, and he alludes to the way people look at him. And I mean, this guy, he was he was born to this man who committed these heinous crimes, and through absolutely no fault of his own, he has had to walk with that burden. So that to me, I was happy to hear him. He was on Busted Open Radio the other day and just stating that he got this entire weight off his shoulders by participating in this. And I really hope that's the case, that he is able to kind of get this out there and get a bit of a sense of closure to this. You would hope. That also moves on to the role Matthew Randazzo plays in the documentary. And I guess David had been critical of him being involved in this. To me, you had to have this person there that was going to walk you through the details, because that's part of the story. And as much as we can look at the different potential causes, we cannot just overlook what happened and just forget about how horrific this was. This was a horrific crime that occurred that weekend in the home that left two people dead, and that is the severity of this. And I think that like you can't just forget about the weekend. We know that exists, and it had to be part of this.
Was that his problem with his inclusion, or did he not like the book? You know?
I don't know what David's specific issue was. I just saw that he wasn't crazy about Matthew Rendazzo being part of this, but regardless of what he thinks about him, I mean, that person had to be in there. And if it wasn't Matthew Rendazzo, someone else that has studied the case intimately that can go through all the details, because that's not going to be left to any of Chris's friends or people that were in his life. It's going to be on a reporter, journalist that has studied the case. So you couldn't do this documentary and just at the final minute, it's kind of, I think that is the weight of all of this accumulation of Chris Benoit's life, whatever it was. Like, this was the ending portion of it, and it can be debated how people are going to remember Chris Benoit, but that is how many are going to remember him.
As far as the production elements itself, I think it continues to do a great job of those reenactments. Just, I think, incredibly chilling, in effect. And I said this to Evan when he was on a guest on the show. I think in many ways, like, seeing some of those scenes reenacted was better than actually having the footage itself, because you could control the mood and the tone of it, and it worked out really well. And we actually, I believe, we have Steve Kassan in the chat room right now, who is one of the actors who was playing a role in some of those enactments. So if you do get a chance to call in, Steve, we'd love to talk to you about that. Also, Tyson Dukes played Chris Benoit in the actual scenes itself, and I thought he did a great job.
Channing Decker is in it as well, another local wrestler. I believe he played Jericho, I think, in some of the scenes.
Right.
So, yeah, and quite a lot of WWE footage in this as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's always, honestly, I didn't think that they were going to be able to get away with it following last season, but evidently they have been, and it's been no issue. As I think Evan has discussed, it operates under fair use, some form of fair use, and they've been able to get away with it.
Was that the case for any of the episodes in season 1? I don't think there was any.
A lot.
Was there?
Yeah, there was a lot of WWE footage.
Okay, then I'm totally just blanking it out. Then that I just associated all the reenactments as the B-roll. But yeah, so any other final thoughts? Just like positive, negative. How the WWE came off in this?
How did they come? Oh, I think they could certainly be faulted, and it's this blame, I don't think, just goes to the WWE, but like really the rest of the world at large, and really even the audience. It's just the fact that I don't think they paid any attention to David Benoit or the family of Nancy Benoit after the fact, and that part I was pretty disappointed to hear. It doesn't make them look good. It's but as far as the way that they treated Chris Benoit with the memorial show, I think we've discussed that.
If you were WWE and you felt the need to have some representation here for your, for whatever reason, who would you send to be that representative to speak on behalf of the company? Because I don't think it would be Vince McMahon.
I don't think it would be Vince either. Who would you send to be a representative that you would be able to trust, to be able to, have your best interests, and to be
Paul Levesque?
That would be sort of at the top of my list. I can't really see them doing it, but it's like, who were some of the voices that they had represent them during the whole circus, the whole media circus after everything came out? I mean, they had a lot of people speak. And
they had some awful representatives of the company going out there and making a farce of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I would say, like, if you were WWE, it would come from the standpoint, and believe me, this would certainly be attached to, a public relations side of things, to go out there and state the inadequacies of their wellness policy at the time and juxtapose it to today. And I think that you have to at least give credit that we are not seeing these enormous problems at the same level as they were in the mid 2000s.
I mean, I certainly feel like even recently you could point some fingers at the credibility of this wellness policy, with just the weirdness that's been going on over the past year. How do you go for several years without any positive tests, and then several in a string at the same time? several violations at the same time. I think that's certainly still a point of contention in my mind.
Yeah, certainly. Any other final thoughts before we head on to the news? Next week, it's going to be New Jack, the life and crimes of New Jack.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it certainly might not be as heavy of a subject as something like this. Other than that, it'll be this and the Owen that I think will be the most affecting for audiences. But the New Jack one I think will be really curious, and I think in many ways pretty dark as well. So I thought they did a great job, and I think the series, it really like manages to handle these really really sensitive subjects with great research and a presentation that I think is not too exploitive, and is ultimately a classic and classy, and I think a good representation to show a non-wrestling fan, hey, like this is one of the biggest stories in wrestling history. Here it is in 2 hours. Here's an understanding of it. So I think they did a great job.
So let's just jot through just a few news items today, and then we're going to open up phone lines for the rest of the show. We're going to be going an hour today. But this came out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, from the KOAT news outlet that was the first to report that early Thursday morning, late Wednesday night, John Jones, UFC light heavyweight champion, arrested and facing several charges. This was after officers had responded after one gunshot had gone off. And when they got to the area, they discovered John Jones in his vehicle. The engine was running. Jones denied having any knowledge of this gunshot, but was displaying signs of being intoxicated. So they performed a sobriety test, and it's believed that he was at least twice over the legal limit. And then they discovered a handgun in the vehicle along with a half-empty bottle of alcohol. So he was taken in and is facing charges of aggravated DWI, negligent use of a firearm, possession of an open container, and no proof of insurance inside the vehicle. And he has since been released from custody. And this is just the latest in a long line of legal problems for John Jones. And I don't even know what to say at any point. This is a pattern of problems that date back years and years. And a guy that ultimately, I mean, we can say that he needs help. I don't know what more to say other than that this pattern continues no matter what stretch he goes through without incident. It always seems to find its way back to something like this.
Really disappointing, and man, coming off of like what the subject of like what we were talking about on this show, it really like makes me fear for the worst in the future with somebody like this, and the amount of behavior that I think he's been demonstrating on a regular basis at this point. To me, like the bigger question is, should this guy be fighting? Should this guy be presented on a main stage headlining these cards while he's still clearly dealing with a lot of personal stuff?
Yeah, I think that's very relevant question, and one that I don't know what the UFC's response to this will be. If they simply just put their hands up and he's going to deal with these legal matters that aren't going to impact them, and they just go with the notion that he'll get his day in court. We'll see what the UFC's response is to all of this. But at a time when the UFC, they're as much as anyone going through a really rough period right now. You want to be once they get the go ahead to be putting fights together, they want to be putting up the biggest fights possible for this year. And John Jones, you would think, would figure into those immediate plans as well. Mm-hmm. But to me, I'm just concerned about this individual, that this is, the idea of, well, it's John Jones and immaturity and such. It's like, there is a large problem here with this guy, that you just hope that there are people around him that are concerned about the individual and not the commodity of John Jones. So anyway, there's not much more to say about on that front. Did you get to see NXT on Wednesday night?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, I didn't watch all the matches, but I kind of saw the main angles and everything. So yeah, I did.
I like that the show, they're moving forward with the takeover matches that will begin next week, and building up in 2 weeks for Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. And at least everything does have a focus at the moment. I really enjoyed the Matt Riddle Roderick Strong match.
Hmm.
That was my favorite match of both programs on
I agree.
Tuesday night. I thought one of the better, an empty match of the year candidate.
Wow, that far, eh?
I think it has to be in the conversation, don't you
I
think? Maybe not number one, but I thought it was pretty damn
I was
great.
surprised at how much I liked that match too, and I really do wonder why because you know, was it a change in style? Like they were working a lot more on kind of ground based, almost like jujitsu grappling level stuff, and that type of stuff to me. Like I've seen grappling matches and they often take place in front of like a pretty empty, quiet arena anyway. In many cases, so I felt like that kind of translated really well to this empty arena setting. Um, I enjoyed that match a lot too. Um, I think having essentially their big takeover to build up to certainly gives the show some direction, and it's something AEW had up until last week when they still had blood and guts to promote. To this week, obviously with AEW, they who knows what their next big show is going to be. So this episode felt a lot more, I would say, directionless. Whereas I think NXT, I do wonder maybe what their taping schedule is going to be like, how much they're taping in advance, how and are they going to go through sort of a similar taping schedule as what the main roster is with WrestleMania? I think that level of focus will help these shows in the next few weeks.
Also to note, the Three Arena in Dublin, Ireland has announced that the UK Takeover event that was set for next month has been pushed back, and they're listing a new date of October 25th. So way down in the year, to potentially be running that Takeover event, and that's it. WWE should be wrapping up their taping schedule today in Orlando, and that will cover them through WrestleMania and the night after Raw, and then I guess it's assessing what happens after that. And all of these companies are just looking for any answers because there's no timeline on any of this. It's just do what you can now, and then we'll assess where the world is a week from now.
Pretty much, yeah,
So,
one thing at a time. But as far as like NXT goes, we should also maybe mention again the continued tease of who is presumed to be the Killer Cross's arrival at the end of the show.
I like the video a lot at the end. I thought it was like a really unique, great video.
I think a good way to go off air, especially at a time where you can't necessarily do the big surprise pop without the audience reacting to it. I think just showing the video worked out. Trying to think what else, what other, like, the return of Io Shirai, getting into that ladder match. Sure, great.
And then next week we've got Velveteen Dream against Bobby Fish, and they're also doing a last chance opportunity with the women that lost their qualifying matches for the ladder match, vying for the last spot in that ladder match.
Yes, and also
so that's coming up next
the
week.
debut of Stokely Malcolm Bivens' new tag team as well.
Yes, he is finally made his on-screen debut as well. So those are some of the highlights of NXT. You can also listen to Up Next with Braden Harrington and Davey Portman with a thorough rundown of NXT from Wednesday night. But I'm looking at the clock, and we don't have a super long amount of time today. So let's open up the phone lines for the rest of the show. If you want to chat about the Benoit documentary, if you want to talk about any other subjects that are going on in pro wrestling or MMA, you name the topic and we will discuss it.
Yeah, you can call us by going onto Skype and searching for Post Wrestling. You can do an audio call for sure, but if you want to give us a video call as well, you can feel free to do that, and we will try our best to hold this whole thing together to get you on air. Let's say hello to several people who are watching us in the chat room right now. A lot of you guys, I guess, with a bit more free time, and you're at home, so you can catch these shows at 3 o'clock. A reminder, we're going to be here next week at 2 p.m. for a big edition of the Café Hangout.
The Super Café Hangout.
You want to call it the Super Café Hangout? Excellent. Okay, so yeah, this will be essentially a placeholder for our Q&A that we were supposed to do in Tampa. And it will be going for 2 hours, taking all your questions, and we'll also be selling a T-shirt for great causes. I can name a couple right now. One of the charities that we wanted to raise some funds for was the Sunnybrook Foundation, which is a local hospital here in Toronto, but also one that features a research facility that has isolated one of the main genes of the COVID-19 virus, and so. I'm probably getting all all the science wrong, but that is certainly at least one of the charities we wanted to devote our attention to. But I think we have our first call. Is
Well,
Chris from
let's
LA?
welcome them in. Oh, Chris from
Are you
LA.
around?
Yeah, do you guys hear
We
me?
can hear you.
Perfectly
Hey,
clear. How's it going, Chris?
It's going all right. Just trying to make do with this coronavirus nonsense, and that's about it.
So what's the kind of your day to day like? Are you just pretty much indoors all day? Give us a sense of how things are where you are.
Okay, so I'm work at the college out here. All of my classes were switched to online. And then there were some like older, like tenure tracks professors that never got the certification to teach online. So they're kind of have to give up some of their classes or just take the training course. But for me, I'm just kind of the city's locked down, like all of Southern California is locked down. So I'm just kind of staying home, and I don't really know how. I have multiple sclerosis, so I don't know how that's going to react to the coronavirus, and I haven't heard anything from the CDC about it, and I just don't want to find out. So I'm just kind of staying back.
Well, we're hope that things are as safe as can be. It's very very stressful time given the whatever people are dealing with. Curious, Chris, if you had a chance to see the Benoit documentary this week.
I did. I saw the Benoit documentary, and I listened to your interview with Jeff Merrick. That was like I was listening to the Law back in those days with him
I
and
know.
Donnie Avery. And yeah, man, that documentary it really put a bad taste in my mouth for Vince McMahon, and just kind of how goes about his business. It's almost like just how he kind of really like wants to, when these tragedies and things like this happen, because it had me thinking about like Melanie Pillman in that interview he did after Raw, and just going through with the Over the Edge pay-per-view after Owen had his accident, and all these different thoughts came in my head watching that, and just David Benoit, kind of felt bad for him. He didn't do a double murder, you know what I'm saying? And it's just kind of like how quick he is to wash his hands of the kid, and like you were saying, I want to say it was yesterday or something, you were talking about how he's just as much of a victim as everybody else involved.
He's very much like a living victim. Like when you think about,
Right.
what, like, I just can't imagine what the last 13 years have been like for him. And that's not someone that I imagine, we were thinking about during this whole time. So I think it's, seeing firsthand the human toll that this took on those that were alive after this weekend. And just imagining that being thrust on you at the age, I don't know how old David is right now, but obviously like this 13 years ago, I can't imagine. I just can't imagine having to go through such a huge portion of your life where you are just simply known as Chris Benoit's son. Yeah, that really just hit me watching the documentary when I saw it the first time.
Yeah, it just kind of like, and I remember those interviews that Jeff Merrick used to conduct with, he conducted them with Chris Benoit, and he did some with like Terry Saturn back in those days too. And, they just seem like normal guys, they would like I remember Perry Saturn even used to do like movie reviews on that website, and it was just and just when that happened, it just kind of showed you how crazy that like the wrestling business could be. But yeah, like I said, I just really I don't know, like us, like sometimes just things like the handling of the Benoit stuff and just all the stuff that the WWE have had dirty hands with. It really does make me think twice about wanting to support them like in the same way that I used to do. Like I love wrestling, but it's just I don't watch WWE with the youthful eyes that I used to watch it with.
Thank you for the call, Chris.
No problem.
Take
Peace,
care.
yo.
So in the chat room, people are actually discussing maybe a news story out there right now, and this is that the fact that Teddy Hart appears to have been arrested again today. This comes from Wrestling Inc., who says this was Hart's third arrest this year, and some added information from Fightful as well. It appears that he was involved in some sort of altercation with independent wrestler Ace Austin, and some of this. Ace Montana. Ace Montana, who posted on Twitter. Oh God. I literally had to pull my gun on Teddy Hart and throw him out of my friend's house. This piece of shit literally choked out and physically assaulted Maria Manic and would not let her get help. She texted me, "I'm in danger. Never ever did I think I would meet a piece of shit like this guy who has now been arrested with a felony against him. I don't think this guy knew how close to death he was." Ooh. And then posting a video as well of the altercation before the cops came and arrested him. So, unfortunate story.
Boy. Yeah, I mean, that's just horrible. So yeah, we will follow up on that. But yeah, that story is just coming out now. So we will discuss that later. If you want to get your calls in before the end of the show, again, you can just look up Post Wrestling on Skype, and we'll keep the calls quick today. I want to fit in as many people as we can before both of us have to kind of get out of here a bit earlier this week. But we will make up for it next week with the supersized edition. Too big for 1 hour. The Super Café Hangout.
That is the tagline. Too big for 1 hour. Yeah. No, it's. Man, it just seems like it's a shitty day. Like, to talk about combat sports figures and getting arrested. That's, man. And especially at a time like this when like people should just be staying at home anyway. I think maybe we need to have our spirits lifted up a little bit, and who better to do that than perhaps with our man Neil. Neil, how you doing?
Hey guys, I'm doing okay. Are you well?
Doing well.
We're doing
nice
well.
To hear that voice.
It's a real pleasure. Oh, thank you very much. And your voices, of course, have been in my ears, keeping me sane over this past couple of weeks. It's first of all, just a sincere thanks to you guys for keeping the post wrestling ship afloat under these circumstances and churning out the great content. And I was really, really happy to see the double shot back. I always missed the double shot, so at least there's a silver lining.
Well, thanks, Neil. I don't want us to be patting ourselves on the back. This is really nothing. So, any thoughts just on anything going on in the news or earlier this week that you would like to discuss?
Yeah, well, I mean, you do deserve a pat on the back, though, John. Come on. I mean, that interview with Jeff Marek, I thought was absolutely terrific. A guy who clearly conflicted views about somebody he had become a close friend of, and it's just it was a terrific interview. And really, I thought, of course, trying to put yourself into his mindset, a very, very tricky thing to do, because he clearly wasn't ready to say he would never forgive, as I think it was who on the documentary said that. I can't remember, probably more than one.
I think you're referencing the comment from Sandra at the end about being asked if she could ever forgive Chris, and she said she believes at some point she will be. Yeah, that was like right near the end that she had mentioned that comment. And I mean, we didn't bring that up in our review, but I thought Sandra was just fantastic in this documentary. Yes. If you hadn't heard her interview with Chris Jericho from a few years ago on his podcast, I mean, I just think she was excellent in this documentary. And to me, someone that to me has a very level-headed approach to this entire thing, and no one would fault her if she didn't. If she was, I mean, she obviously is scarred from this, but to me, has the ability to look at this from as much of a different vantage points as possible. And I thought she was like a total credit to this documentary by being part of it.
Yeah, yeah. I remember it all quite well, and I remember being really very. And I wonder, I mean, it was part of your guys' job. Did it sour you on the whole pro wrestling scene at the time? Because I certainly got, as more and more of the horrific details of the Bibles being set by the bodies and all of that stuff, which is really hard to listen to in the documentary. But I remember it all, I'd forgotten some of those things, and it comes back, and I just remember at the time in the sort of late 2000s thinking, I might be done with this whole. Of course, I wasn't. The thing about pro wrestling is, when you get into it as a kid, you often never shake it. But did you guys get really soured at all on the business because of
You
it?
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certain, we all might have had those thoughts at the time. I think, though, this kind of goes more for John than myself, but we were probably so caught up in trying to like get the story and to really try to present it in however, whether it was like through the law or through things we were doing at the Fight Network, that there wasn't enough time to think about it like that. I mean, we are certainly fans, but like we're also our hats are kind of different when it comes to looking at professional wrestling too. And if there's a story to follow, I think that, at least to me, has always kind of been more my perspective. If anything, I think that presented a scenario where it was more important than ever to kind of pay close attention to professional wrestling. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hated like just this was just 24/7 this story, and it was just such a dark story. But I mean, that is, you don't like that. That's part of the job. You know what I mean? There's unfortunately there's going to be horrific things at times that you have to cover. I do remember that summer, like not being all that high on just watching wrestling. Like it just felt very secondary to this larger story that was going on, that I think everyone was kind of at a distance from just watching wrestling, or at least being very engaged in the product at that time. I think it was one of those kind of step back moments where people were taking a larger view at this industry as a whole and assessing, its shortcomings, certainly. And maybe that's understating things.
Maybe, yeah. Could I leave you guys with a quick question, and then I'll get off the air and let someone else get in? On that, it's a quick follow-up on that sort of journalistic mindset way that you just brought up. If you guys were offered information this week on the results of WrestleMania, would you, as a fan, would you want to say no? Or as a journalist, would you want to say, yeah, let me know? And what would you do with that info? And that's it from me. I'll let someone else get on the air.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this. I mean, it is news, and I think like Wei and I have discussed, like we would put it up and label it as such, and it's really on you if you want to
label it as a spoiler,
read it or not, and that's kind of it. I don't know if they'll come out. It's not like I've been told anything, so we'll see. It's, to me, the comparison, it's much less like television taping where everything's going to be up there without fail. But this is closer to like a season of Ultimate Fighter, where there were some times when stuff would come out, but those are pretty rare, even up until recent seasons. So, our NDA is part of the equation in any of this, and I think that there's going to be extra caution among those, just because it is a smaller circle that's going to be aware of this. And is the company taking any precautions? I actually have more questions about that. Like the idea of results, I just don't think twice about them. It's not, doesn't detract from my interest at all. But more so, I'm more so curious, like what measures are being taken, if any, in this unique set of circumstances where it's the only time probably we'll ever have this, where WrestleMania will be done 10 days before it airs.
Yeah. Me personally, I mean, I would always like to have the experience of a fan. You know, I know we kind of talk about like trying to cover this as journalists, but for me, like in order for me to give my opinion on a review show, I want to experience it the way that the producers intended for me to experience it, and that obviously would probably be without spoilers. So if they do come out, I would try my best to try to avoid them. But you know, obviously, in doing this job, it might not be possible. But I will definitely try my best. I think we got Hansi on the line. Hansi, I did mute you, so if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, we can get you right on air. And sorry everybody who's also trying to call in. Please keep trying to call in. We only have one line, but we want to try to get to you as soon as we can. But Hansi, are you there?
Yes, yes. Hi, guys. I didn't know if I was gonna get through, so I gave up, and you called back, so I just thought, okay, I'll come back on. So I just wanted to say that yeah, I saw the Benoit documentary. It really, I don't know, like I was in tears mostly for the Eddie stuff, because like it just, like, you know what I mean. Like, I'm glad they covered the Eddie stuff, and it was just it just brought back like a lot of bad memories of like that time, whatever. Because I remember in 2007, like, it was a really good year up until that whole Benoit thing happened. Because I remember, like, afterwards, just like it was all like, just like, obviously considering what happened, it just kind of like, it wasn't like the same really. And I just liked like the clips they showed of, like, you know, the WrestleMania. I'm surprised they even got WWE's blessing for some of the footage being used.
I don't think they got their blessing, Hansi. I think that was just the, you know, if you look up like fair use, I mean, that it's not something like WWE just handed this footage over or licensed it to them. I don't think that was the case.
Oh, okay. I thought like, yo, I'm surprised WWE just I was surprised about that. But I'll talk about AEW. I liked yesterday's show a lot.
Okay.
I just, you know, the Brody Lee stuff, and I know you guys covered it on your podcast, but like I thought, like, okay, listen, if you want to take jabs at Vince McMahon, that's cool, but like it just feels like Brody Lee is just doing a cosplay of Vince McMahon, and if that's like gonna be the whole character, like, I understand. Listen, he got done dirty by Vince McMahon. If the rumors are true about, like, you know, getting added to the contract and then getting released, kind of, in a way, I understand that, like, you want to get some shots off, but if you're gonna like make your whole character based off Vince McMahon, I don't know how much legs this fucking character has, really. You know what I mean? It just kind of, I don't know. It just didn't really like, it didn't really come across well for me. But the last segment with Jericho and Matt Hardy, I think it's like one of their best segments like they've done, in like a promo where like they mix humor with seriousness with it, and I really liked it a lot. And before I go, I just want to say, you guys have been an inspiration with me for doing for podcasting and all that, and like many others as well. I just want to say that I started my own podcast. You know, it won't get as much traction, but I did start my own podcast during this pandemic. It only took me to the end of the world, basically, to start this. But you guys were like a huge inspiration for it. You know what I mean? I just, you know what I mean? 'Cause I listened to you guys for like a decade plus already, and you guys were like actually like an influence behind like my podcast, essentially. But I just want to thank you for that.
What's your podcast?
Oh, it's called the Bipolar Coaster. It's on Anchor. I'm just doing it on my phone, just test it out. But like, yeah, it's just starting out right now. I kept it secret for a bit to record some podcast, but then I kind of just publicized it because the trolls eventually found it. So I might as well just publicize it. But yeah, it's all right. I started this week, but I've already done like 4 podcasts essentially. So I just want to thank you guys for being an inspiration, and many others who have also inspired me as well.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks, so
Hansi.
much. Bye.
Take care. All right, I think we're going to try to get to some more phone calls here. I want to get to Bruce. Please call back in a bit. But first, we got Brandon from New Jersey. Can you just unmute your mic, Brandon? As we wait for the man himself. There he is.
How was that?
Hi.
Hey, guys.
How
are
you doing, man? Happy belated birthday.
How are you? Oh, thank you. Appreciate the well wishes. Thank you.
I believe there was one of us who went out of their way to bring it up.
John, I appreciate it. Thank you. Man, I didn't expect that from you. Much love, my brother. Much love. I hope you're doing well, man.
What's on your mind, Brandon?
Yeah, John Jones, man. How do you get arrested during a pandemic?
I mean, I know that there's going to be jokes made about this. I really don't think it's like funny. It's like
it's not funny. I'm just
Brandon.
saying, like,
I understand like it's you. So I think everyone understands Brandon from New Jersey. Yeah, it's just. I mean, no one can be stunned. It's the question is like how long this continues and where this ultimately ends. I mean, how do you think that this is handled by UFC? Is it simply they just go on business as usual? They're going to book this guy a fight, or do you think that there's a larger issue here that is going to be eye-opening?
Oh man, nothing would surprise me. I mean, after all, they're getting that Khabib fight probably to Dubai. I saw them on a flight there, so I mean, who knows how desperate Endeavor is for that money to get a big time fight on TV.
They're going to the Dana White Castle of Fear, home of UFC 249.
I mean, Dana's actions during this week and a half is just, I mean, it's abominable. I mean, he's the definition of what our president is. Absolute narcissist. It's scary. It's sad. It's making me sour on the UFC completely. I mean, why couldn't he be like Bellator when all this shit jumped off and just close up shop immediately, like Scott Coker did? Instead, this guy,
or at the very least, like, listen, it's not like they are not being criticized, WWE, but I mean, Vince McMahon just has almost no public profile anymore. I mean, he's not out there just. Could you imagine if this was in 2001 and Vince McMahon was just going stir crazy and doing interviews all over the place while, if at this point, at least WWE's running, UFC can't even run. And it just seems like every day Dana White's he's crashing on like Instagram live feeds. He's just doing a new interview every day. And I think it's just, this guy's just going crazy that he can't run shows at the moment. And I think it's, I just think the totality of his media appearances have just put him in a bad light among many who, I mean, the real world is not as focused on making April 18th.
There's bigger issues in the world than I know. I know this fight. Everybody wants to see this fight, but and I mean, there's bigger things at stake. Lives are at stake. Who cares about a fight? You can make it up anytime you want.
I do feel for the fighters. Like, the fighters are in an awful position here. Like, they're
not getting no money.
Like, they don't know what. Like, are we going to see anything if this fight doesn't occur? Like, they just don't know. For most of them, they can't train because these gyms are closing in all of this. Do I have a fight on this date? Should I be training? Am I still paying all of my trainers during this period, or versus am I going to get paid at the end of it? The anxiety level has to be through the roof, and at a time when you might have to fight in the next couple of weeks, I can't imagine the stress level.
Yeah, it's a crazy doggy business, man. I don't know. I'm kind of soured on it. We'll see what happens, but thanks for taking my call, and keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate it. The postmarks appreciate it. We love you guys, and we love the content from everybody in the BD and everything like that. So thank you, and talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you,
Stay safe, Brandon. Are we going to do one more call?
Let's try to do one more here, and I think we got our first video call here from Bruce Lord. Bruce, if you wouldn't mind just unmuting yourself, we will get you right on air right there. So, yeah.
There we go. Is that on? Is that on?
Yes, it is.
Lovely. Yeah, good to see you guys. Good to see you guys. Just kind of wanted to echo what everybody else has been saying. With the whole move to working from home and every day bleeding into the next one, it's kind of nice to have some degree of normalcy. With the usual post schedule, kind of reminding you of which day is Monday and which day is Wednesday and things like that.
The unofficial calendar.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. Kind of just an open question, I guess, regarding the Benoit documentary and what it sort of pertains to. I mean, like a lot of people, I found it, it was difficult to watch, and it, of course, brought me back to the experience of finding out about this. Specifically in my case, living out on the West Coast, we were watching that episode of Raw with whatever it would have been, a 2 or 3 hour delay. So by the time that was airing, the truth was out there. And so for the first hour or whatever it was, we were kind of in the weird position of knowing what had happened and then watching all of these guys kind of eulogize Benoit. And I can vividly remember.
Sorry to interrupt, Bruce.
Sorry,
this was in Canada, and you were on the West Coast?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were watching this on what would have been the Score at the time?
Sounds about right. It was at a friend's house. I mean, I didn't have cable at the time, but when news broke out, we ran to a friend's house specifically.
Because in the States, the USA Network did air this on the West Coast feed, the same thing. I wasn't aware that was the case in Canada as well, so that's interesting. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. I can't remember the details, but it was, the truth of it was out there on the internet by the time we were sitting down to watch it. And I can really remember Regal was the one that really sticks out in my mind, because you got the sense that by the time they got around to taping his segment or going live with him, people were beginning to find out what had happened. And there was just such an abrupt shift in tone in his voice. He was, trying to speak in this very measured way, only talking about Chris as a professional and as a wrestler, not as a person. And that just, was so haunting and eerie. I guess the question that I would want to throw to you guys then is, it seems to me that part of the value of this series has been sort of the, cathartic and therapeutic value that it might have for people like Chavo, and obviously for people like Benoit's son. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering as to why you think there's maybe been a cultural shift with regards to people within the industry being willing to talk about this sort of thing, above and beyond the usual kind of protecting the business sort of attitude. I mean, obviously, I think it's a lot healthier, but I just have to think that, if a project like this was trying to be done even 15 years ago, you wouldn't get the same transparency and candid commentary from so many people involved in it. So I guess I'll just leave you with that and hang up. But thanks for taking the call. And, again, thank you very much for, providing a sense of normalcy through all this.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Appreciate the call. I think specific to Benoit, I just feel that it's something that has been like I've spoken to people that just didn't want to delve into this when it was much closer to that time period. I think in the time now separated from this, that people can kind of sit down and assess something that has been, for these people that were interviewed on this, I imagine there was a lot of just suppressing it. And you've seen kind of it led by Jericho on his podcast that has done a lot of extensive research into this and speaking to different people and going into it with as many questions as anyone else, because this was someone that, he wanted to figure out as many answers about it. And I think because of the addition of time, I think more people are now willing to talk about something because they ultimately have those questions, or, sometimes they say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, that why bottle all this up? Let's get this out there. Let's have this discussion about all these things that we've spoken about privately and have the larger conversation, instead of just, this doesn't exist, this did not happen, or it's just not to be spoken about, where I think that leaves some sense of unease in terms of, getting people's closure in all of this that I imagine they were seeking from. Different perspective if you're a reporter or journalist, but for those characters involved, that were close to Chris, I think that this was, I think time is the biggest factor.
Certainly, yeah. I think it's the creation of media such as, these podcasts, Jericho's podcast, a show like Dark Side of the Ring, that I think has facilitated a lot of these conversations, because, number one, they are topics that are always, whether or not, we really want to admit it, they're kind of in the back of our minds all the time. And it's, there's a real interesting curiosity about all these topics, and the fact that I think these platforms exist encourages discussion. But I think it's also the fact that a show like this, like Jericho's podcast, has been able to present these topics in a non-sensational way. I think they've been able to present these topics with respect, so that, the wrestlers themselves feel comfortable trying to get their stories out there, and they know they won't be, they won't have their words twisted to make it sound like it was some sort of tabloid type of thing. And it takes something, I think, for a company like Vice to be able to put the money towards a story like this as well, to present it on a main stage. So I think all those factors probably have a bit of a role to play into it.
All right, that's going to bring an end to the show. So thanks to everybody for tuning in today, listening to the show. Again, it's going to be the supersized edition of the Cafe Hangout next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Everybody can tune in and watch/listen at youtube.com/postwrestling. My last question for everybody out there. I've discovered Tiger King, and my poll question is, should Wei Ting have to watch Tiger King? The options are yes and yes, and we'll review it. So do vote on whether Wei will have to watch Tiger King on Netflix, the most insane thing that I've ever seen.
Well, I think I don't have a choice then, it sounds like.
Come on, you got some homework over the next little while.
Are you finished it?
No rush. No, I've only watched the first 2 episodes, but it is unbelievable.
Okay. Brandon suggested Cafe Grande Hangout. I think that's a brilliant name for the show.
That's pretty good.
Awesome.
That's not bad.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This thing held up, so it bodes well for next week. So please join us then. Talk to you guys soon.